Three people that I know that are going to speak, and that may be enough, but at the same time, we're going to, if anybody else wants to speak in addition to those three, we've got a sign-up sheet over there. But the three that I've spoken with, they're already on the list. And it's very exciting to have our first, as far as since I've been here, is a joint committee meeting with the Senate and Chairman Bethel here. And I'm going to turn you on there so you can say what you want to. But before we get started, as we always do in the House anyway, I'd like to go to the Lord in prayer and get this meeting started off. And Mr. Nimmer, would you like to open us up in the word of prayer?
Yes, sir. If y'all will bow with me. Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the safety of travel to bring us each one here to discuss the business of this state. Lord, we just ask that your guiding hand be upon us during these conversations, giving us clear direction for what we need to do. We ask these things in your holy and matchless name. Amen.
Thank you very much. I'm going to allow Chairman Bethel to say a couple words here before we get this thing kicked off, if that's all right. Chairman Bethel, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your hospitality and welcoming us to your room. I see that some of our committee have made it in. It's sometimes hard for us to get on our normal path and show up at the same place, but I appreciate the working relationship that you have with our committee and hope that we have been able to be a good partner this year and look forward to that continuing. Thank everybody who has come today to talk to us about some of the specific and unique issues related to our labor practices in Georgia.
Great, thank you. Let me just kind of make my opening announcement, and then I'll allow you to say some things before we. And Chairman Bethel and I have talked about the agenda today, and it's our agenda to do several things. One is I think both of us want to talk about the committee, make sure we give everybody an opportunity to meet each other. You know, sometimes we get so hectic down here we don't have an opportunity to meet some of the new members. We've got two new members on the House side, and I'm assuming you've got at least one or two new members on the Senate side. So maybe one of the first things we'll do in a moment is just very quickly have everybody a quick announcement of who they are. But let me tell you what I'd like to do is I want to focus today primarily on the Workers' Comp Advisory Council process, and a process that we have been doing for a number of years here in Georgia. I will tell you that it's been confirmed by many people that it's a model that many states around the country wish that they had similar situations, and it's a result of not by me or the committee members, but because we've had this advisory council working for a number of years and continually improved, and it suits our meets our needs very, very well. Doesn't mean there's not opportunity for improvement, but we want to preserve what we've been doing for a number of years. And I know we're going to have a couple people give a little historical background on what that process is, why it is, and so on and so forth. And then we want to, of course, Chairman Bethel will say what he wants to, and then we'll have those people make some comments. And then we also want to give the four authors, there's four pieces of legislation that currently reside in this committee, and I've told the authors they're invited. They certainly don't have to, but if they would like to come present their bill in a very abbreviated manner, we're not going to take action on those bills today, but I think House Bill 216 is an example that we heard several weeks ago, is a great example of how complex the workers' comp process is and how difficult it can be in many, many moving parts. And so we want to give the representative and the senators the opportunity to present those. And, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different factions, a lot of different people that represent interest in this entire process. And as I've said, I never want to tell a representative or a senator that they cannot introduce the legislation, because that'd be the surest way to get killed down here. But they can certainly represent or introduce any type of legislation that they want to. But as far as the Industry and Labor Committee on the House side, when it comes to workers' compensation, we're really going to look to our partners on the Advisory Council for direction and information and everything. Let me also clarify, we're not a rubber stamp for that process. We don't do something that they say just because they recommend it. So there's a process that we go through, and I certainly don't have the technical expertise to understand everything that it is, and I rely on some experts. And I think the House Bill 412 this year is a great example. It's about 18 months worth of discussions before the desired outcome of that is. And not that everybody was 100% happy with it, but I think overall it was a way to take a very difficult process and move forward. And so before we go any further, Chairman, would you like to add anything? Be happy to turn the mic over to you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think you very well summarized my sentiments in our discussions leading up to this meeting, and I would only add that I think the points you were making are especially true for all of us. We all come from our own work backgrounds, as they may be, and most of my work has been in a manufacturing setting, and prior to that in a law firm setting. And we tend to view issues through those filters. What I like about the advisory process and the process of taking input is we are able to aggregate all of those different work experiences, because if we assume that every workplace is like ours and every work experience mirrors ours, then we're apt to make mistakes. And so it's always important to take in that inclusive view, and I appreciate your attitude towards that as well.
Great. Why don't we real quick just go across the room so that we're all kind of new in the same room. Senator Unruh, you want to go first over there? Just introduce yourself. Try to give you a little... Okay. Really didn't mean to surprise you like that. So,
yeah, I'm P.K. Martin from Gwinnett County.
All right.
Bill Workhauser from Titanal, Wayne, and Evans County.
I'm going to light them all up. I don't know.
Barry Fleming from Columbia County.
Brian Strickland from Henry County.
Bruce Broderick from Dalton.
Chad Nemmer, Pierce County.
Dewey McLean from Gwinnett County.
Pedro Marin, Gwinnett County.
Hugh Floyd, Gwinnett County.
That's not fair. Love it. Gwinnett rules. We rock.
All right, great. Why don't we, if you're ready, Mr. Chairman, we'll go ahead and have our first speakers up. And I think that we had, let me explain how we're going to do the speakers. Bill Clark, if you would go ahead, are you starting off, Bill? Or Roy Bowen? Okay. And it's my understanding that their testimony today will be not in their individual jobs, but as representatives of the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council. Roy is, and he'll say this, but he's the current chair of the Advisory Council. Bobby Potter is the chair of the Legislative Committee, and normally we would have Bobby here, but Bobby is on an airplane at the moment, and Bill Clark has graciously decided to fill him in. And I've asked them to give us a little historical perspective, and which brings us up to where we are today. So if y'all are going to go ahead, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Roy Bowen with the Georgia Association of Manufacturers, but as the chairman indicated, appearing today as the chairman of the Advisory Council to the State Board of Workers' Compensation. And we really thank you and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today to acquaint you with the role and value of the Advisory Council. In its present form, the Council has been in existence since the early 1990s. And it consists of about 110 stakeholders in the workers' comp system, really representing all of the groups with an interest in ensuring the best possible care for injured workers. Now, these 110 stakeholders include representatives of small, medium, and large employers, some of whom are self-insured, some of whom are insured in the commercial market, organized labor, claimant attorneys, defense attorneys, insurers and third-party administrators, medical providers, and rehabilitation specialists. And these stakeholders work to make continuing improvements to Georgia's workers' comp system through their work on 6 committees. And each of these committees meet throughout the year on a very regular basis. There'll be the Legislative Committee, which Bill Clark is going to describe in a little more detail in a little bit. The Medical Committee, which deals with medical costs, fee schedules, treatment protocols, and such. The Rules and Mediation Committee, which formulates the rules to implement legislative change to the statute and help to deal with rules bringing about efficiency, more efficient operation to the board itself. A Licensure and Self-Insurance Committee, which provides guidance and direction in that area. A Public Education Committee, which is responsible for designing and executing seminars around the state for those involved with the system, including employers and attorneys, and a Rehabilitation and Managed Care Committee, which deals with matters involving that subject matter. Now, each of these committees has developed a mission statement and works to achieve objectives that are formulated annually. The committee most involved with the General Assembly is the Legislative Committee, which, as Chairman Hambleton said, is chaired by Bobby Potter. And nearly all the stakeholder groups are represented on this committee, and there's a very close working relationship between the Legislative Committee and each of the other 5 committees. And I say Bill Clark, who's a member of the Legislative Committee, will more fully describe that process. But I want to close this section by just sharing with you a couple of key operating principles, a couple of which were really referred to by the chairman. We are an advisory council to the State Board of Workers' Compensation, and recommendations based upon achieving consensus among the various stakeholder groups are presented to the chairman of the State Board. And the final decisions as to what comes forward are really those of the chairman. Now, that advisory status also pertains to the council standing with the General Assembly. It's the members of the General Assembly who press the red and green buttons, and we fully understand and respect that fact. That said, however, we are very, very appreciative of the General Assembly's willingness over the past 20 years or so to give great weight to the recommendations of the Advisory Council. The second sort of overriding principle is that while serving as a member of the Advisory Council, representing one of various stakeholder groups, we do expect that you'll represent your interest group fairly, but we also fully expect that you'll adhere to the overriding interest, that being the welfare of the injured worker, the efficiency with which the system operates, and the appropriateness of cost to employers. We'll tell you that the work of the General Assembly, the work of the Advisory Council, and of course a very well-run board have earned for the Georgia system an A rating. And Georgia is one of only, I think, 5 states that have achieved that level of rating. So it's something I think we should all take a great deal of pride in. I can certainly remember the days when that really wasn't the case. So it is, Mr. Chairman, it has been a great partnership between the Advisory Council, the Board, and the General Assembly, and we look forward to it continuing. So with that, I'd like to ask Bill Clark to talk about maybe a little bit of the history, what got us to this point, and how the Legislative Committee functions.
Great. We'll go ahead and take testimony now from Mr. Clark, and then if anybody has any questions of the 2 gentlemen, we'll open that up after he's finished his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you're also a chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bill Clark. I represent the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, and more specifically on issues concerning workers' compensation, I represent the injured workers side of the debate. I represent over 400 lawyers that are in our association that represent injured workers. Some of them, that's all they do. We have about 200 lawyers that is the exclusive nature of their practice, representing injured workers, and another 200 that do a smattering of litigation, including representing injured workers. But as the chairman said, I'm not here today in that capacity. You hear me talking on behalf of injured workers and our lawyers all session long. Today I'm here as a member of the Legislative Committee of the Advisory Council. I've been involved in workers' comp all of my professional life. For the first 6 years of my law practice, I represented employers and the insurance companies that insure them, as well as some self-insured employers. I then jumped the fence and began representing injured workers and did that for about 4 years before I completely lost my mind and became a lobbyist instead of a litigator. Down here, I represent, as I said, the injured workers and their lawyers. In about 2000, I was appointed to the Advisory Council, and so this is my 15th year on the Advisory Council. Let me just give you a little bit of the history of why the Advisory Council is in place. Let me take you back to about 1991, 1992. There was a pretty contentious debate over what at that time was called workers' compensation reform. Georgia was one of the states that were caught up in sort of a national movement. The legislation's failure in its first year to pass prompted a series of town hall meetings all over Georgia busloads of injured workers were brought in. Waves of business executives and insurance adjusters and others involved in the fight came in, and they sort of besieged legislators in all of these town hall meetings around the state. By the time the 1992 legislative session started, legislators had been inundated, frankly, with propaganda from both sides. Strong felt arguments on behalf of injured workers and strong felt beliefs on behalf of and arguments on behalf of business and those who pay for the workers' comp system financially. A bill ultimately passed, and I think everyone would agree that nobody was happy. Depending on your perspective, the bill was woefully inadequate to protect the interests of business in Georgia, or it decimated the rights of injured workers in Georgia. There was no middle ground. It was that extreme. There was a lot of political blood shed on the floor of both the House and the Senate. And that summer in the elections of 1992, a number of awfully good people got retired from the legislature, in large part because of this fight. Soon after that election, at the urging of some state legislators and some other state leaders, the chairman of the State Board of Workers' Compensation at that time put together an advisory council. He said he wanted to pull together a group of people who lived day in and day out in the workers' comp world, not legislators who, as Chairman Bethel has described, live in your own world, whatever that world is, whatever business you come from. You focus on that business. You don't focus on the business of workers' compensation. And so the chairman wanted to bring together all of the disparate interests, all of the different perspectives into a single council to advise him on what needed legislation there was, what was necessary, what meaningful legislation, as the chair of the Workers' Comp Board, he could then recommend to the legislature. Roy has told you a little bit about who is on the council, and I won't belabor that other than to say, and we hear this phrase from time to time, but everybody with a dog in the fight, everybody with an interest in how Georgia's workers' comp system operates has a seat at this table. And I would say that that's true for all 6 of the committees that Roy described. It is particularly true with the legislative committee. And since you are legislators, I would submit to you that that is the committee that works most on trying to work out issues before the chair and the state board bring to you the board's legislative package. Over these last 2 decades, sort of a clarion call has developed within the advisory council, and that is find proposals that improve the system. The question that's asked is, does this proposal help one side over the other, or does it maybe when packaged with another proposal help the entire comp system? And if it does the former, folks are going to look at it with an awfully jaundiced view. But if it does the latter, if it goes toward improving the system as a whole, it has a much better chance of getting through our advisory process than through the board's analysis of what should go in its package and ultimately to you in the form of a bill. That's the lens through which the Advisory Council has viewed proposals, as I said, for these last 2 decades. For you as legislators, I would submit the Advisory Council is a very valuable resource. We serve as a stable, reliable vetting machine, if you will, for proposals that come to you. If a constituent brings you their own well-intended idea or proposal, you have the ability to tell them that you have available to you a group of experts in the workers' comp system, a group of folks who will collaboratively work together to view that proposal and to decide whether it ought to be a part of Georgia's public policy as it relates to workers' compensation. We make, if you will, the first decision in that regard. And if your constituent's proposal ultimately finds its way into the board package and gets to pass, you get to take credit for having shepherded that legislation from the constituent to the governor's desk. If, however, in the collective judgment of the Advisory Council, that proposal is not in the best interest of the comp system, we'll make that recommendation. And if the board chairman takes that recommendation and doesn't put it into the legislation, and ultimately your constituent's proposal doesn't pass, then you get to blame us. You get to blame this bunch of pin-headed people off in some agency somewhere that you don't really have a lot of control over, but we're there for that purpose. We vet those proposals to help you make informed decisions. And I'll close with this part by saying I think we are a pretty effective petri dish, or for those of you in the medical industry, sort of a clinical trial for whether a proposal is good for the overall system or whether it's problematic. And then we come to you almost always as a single voice on behalf of a package. So you don't have to weigh the relative pitches from this side versus that side. You get to know that a thorough vetting process has happened, and if it's in the board's package, it was vetted by all the different stakeholders, and it was agreed upon that that package, although not the most popular package, one side may disagree with this part of the bill and the other side may disagree with the other part of the bill, but collectively we all put our stamp of our approval that it is for the betterment of the public policy of Georgia and of the workers' comp system. The legislative committee, to be very quick with it, we work throughout the year. We begin our meetings shortly after we all come up for air after the session ends, and we begin a dialogue of what do your folks need, what are your folks concerned about, and we assemble a list of issues, a list of proposals, or at least a list of concerns, and then we begin trying to work together to come up with solutions that address those concerns. And our goal throughout the summer and the fall is to then be able to put together a package that we can recommend to the chair of the State Board of Workers' Compensation, and then he or she can bring it forward in whatever fashion they decide. But they too will have had the benefit of all of the stakeholders working on the issue throughout the summer and fall months to put together a package that we believe represents a good adjustment to the workers' comp system in the state of Georgia. That's what we do. For those of you who've been around a while, you can, I think, testify to how helpful it has been to you as legislators and certainly to the legislative system. If you're relatively new to the legislature, folks will tell you sometimes it only takes one time to sort of get your hand bitten when you're trying to do what you think is right and you're going up that hill on your own, but it hasn't been vetted through the advisory council process, and there might be another consideration that ought to be taken into account when you're pushing your bill. So we commend it to you. Roy and I are glad to answer any questions, but we'd really appreciate both chairmen inviting us to have the chance today to describe for you what we, on behalf of all of the stakeholders, believe is a very effective way of advising the Workers' Comp Board and advising you as legislators on how to shape public policy as it relates to workers' compensation in Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you very much. Before we open up for any questions, I want to do a couple things. You touched on just some comments from me. I know as an independent business owner, there have been times where certain workers' compensation situations occurred in my workplace where it would be very easy for me to single that one situation out and want to pass legislation to fix that one situation. And I think that's one of the real values of the advisory council that we have, because sometimes that's what we do. We react to certain situations and we lose sight of the fact that those may be very rare and very extreme situations. And I think y'all do a great job of looking at the entirety of the entire system, and we could all point to extreme cases, very rare cases on both sides of the spectrum, no matter where you're at. And so I appreciate that. Also want to take a moment to recognize two people in the audience. Frank McKay, who is our Workers' Comp Board Chair, is here. Frank, welcome, and thank you for being here. And then we also have the Honorable former State Rep and former Chair of this committee, Mike Cohen, who is the Executive Director of the Subsequent Trust Fund. So welcome both of you. Thank you for joining us today. And with that, members of the committee or Chairman, any comments or questions of these two people from the Advisory Council process?
Mr. Chair, I would just observe, and by way of thanking you both as well, that one of the things that it's always worth remembering, and I know that the Advisory Council does that, is the nature of the grand compromise that is workers' compensation. That everybody who comes to the table is at times frustrated, but nobody wants to go back. to a world in which, workers were faced with, the risk and the time exposure and the risk of a zero walk away, and employers were, put into the adversarial world of litigating with oftentimes current employees, those sorts of things, these issues. And so I know that's the perspective that council brings to the table, so I appreciate that and value it. I think sometimes it's easy to get fixated on a particular dispute or an issue and not remember how we got here. And like I say, none of us, I don't think, lived through that, but none of us want to go back.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I believe that Joe Lehman, you want to go to either location and tell us who you are and who you represent. I think, as Mr. Clark said, he represents, in part of his real job, the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. And within that group, you have a number of other specialties. And I think that Joe here is able to talk to us today, whether it be that specialty or just the advisory council process. And go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of the Senate and House. I'm Joe Lehman. I'm an attorney in Dalton, Georgia. And special hello to Representative Broderick and Senator Bethel. I was part of the 1992 bloodbath, and as our representative can attest, that the ground zero for the 1992 bloodbath was with Jim Tyson Griffin out of the district of Dalton. And we did say no more. But beyond the legislative process that we established with the advisory, it's really about all the players and all the people and all the issues confined. Working together with you, because you represent the people. You represent industry, injured workers, boaters, and we in advisory do the same. And I want to say that the doors are open, not just of legislative, but of every subcommittee of the advisory to the legislative process, so that we do have a system. I'm former president of WCCL, Workers' Comp Claimants Lawyers. I'm the current president of the Georgia Injured Worker Advocates. But in my first 15 years, I represented every large carpet company in Dalton. So I understand that we have to all work together. We're a return-to-work system, which is different than an MMI. We want to get people back to work. And so you may have issues that can maybe be handled by a rule. So I would say that the Rules Committee, which is the committee that meets monthly and is kind of the gateway to the board, it's an administrative agency, and we sit and advise the board and propose rules so that it functions with the people and its players. I just wanted to, on behalf of the board, because I figured since I've been on the advisory since 96, 97, that our door is open. It's a symbiotic relationship, that we are partners in good government for the state of Georgia. And if there's ever any question, I think the board and the advisory council is open, and I know Mike Cohn can attest to that. I mean, I want to get back on track with advisory and the legislature, because they were, through the years, lockstep working together. And that's part of our jobs together, is to work together. And I look forward to doing that in the future. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Lehman from anybody on the committee? Thank you. And I'll just make another comment based on that. The system is designed to work, does work. I had a situation several years ago. We had an injured worker, loss of a finger in a job, and many of the people told me, well, the system unfortunately is going to require that person to probably leave, and we were able to have such a great relationship with insurance company, the employer, everybody, the worker, that not only did we get it all put together, but he continued to work for us another 6 months before having a staffing agent before he went to the client of which the incident occurred. So to me, that's the way the system should work, that you provide the adequate safety and medical and rehab that's necessary to cover that worker, but that you don't create an adversarial relationship where you have to do a global release and make them go someplace else. We know that sometimes that's the outcome, but I'm glad to see that was a great testimony that the system really did work in that particular case. And so if no other questions from the audience.
I woke up. I'm sorry.
Let me assure you, this could be dangerous since he just woke up. He said the prayer and has been asleep since then. So go ahead. Representative Nimmer, go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you probably can answer this question, and I failed to ask from the beginning. How long do the advisory board members serve, and how are they selected?
That would be something I would ask one of the members. Go ahead, Roy. Come to the microphone since we're live, so that.
And I apologize, Mr. Roy.
He woke up.
I woke up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The advisory council members are appointed by the chair of the state board, and there is no defined term, but the chair attempts to rotate members on and off the board to bring fresh perspective. So I would say it would not be unusual to serve on the advisory council 3, 5, 7 years. Okay. I might ask, Mr. Chairman, if there are several members of the advisory council that are present in the audience, let me just have them raise their hand to give you.
Go ahead and announce them, Roy.
Would those members on the advisory council please stand?
That is a motley crew.
And we also have two House members, Representative Roderick, or do you still have a? Still on the medical committee, yes. All right. Thank you very much. All right. One of the purposes of today also, and it was brought to my attention, was we had several pieces of legislation that were introduced and discussed early in the process, and what I found out was that several of these representatives were working hard on this legislation. In one case, had been working on it for several years to bring forward, and they had no idea when they talked to me about this, and as I explained the workers' comp process. And so we really wanted to do two things, do this from a public setting to really try to help educate not only you in this audience, but the legislators, that we have this process set up and that we really encourage them to make sure that if they have ideas or situations, that we get them to the advisory council for their review. And so what we did today was we offered, there's currently 4 pieces of legislation in this committee, and we invited all 4 of those members to come here today to very quickly and briefly, just a very quick overview of that piece of legislation. And then Representative Micah Gravely, I'm going to call him first because we had a hearing on his bill recently, and I think it was very obvious with the complexity of the bill that he introduced how we as legislators, not that we're not competent and able to handle such complex issues, but it became very apparent very rapidly as how we would need much outside counsel and advice to help us steer this way. So Representative, you want to come very briefly present to us House Bill 216.
Thank you. I've actually, since that committee meeting, it was very painful, I've actually since filed a workers' compensation claim for myself, actually. No, you know, it's House Bill 216. I think you're actually correct, and I'm glad that you have, Mr. Chairman, organized.
Thank you for recognizing that I'm correct. So I appreciate that.
Indeed you are. The need for this type of hearing. I knew from the beginning when I filed this bill, as I stated in my letters, I had penned letters to Judge Frank McKay, Chairman Hamilton, and Chairman Roy Bowen, indicating that I was going to file the bill. But due to the nature of the bill, it needed to go through this vetting process. I wanted the advisory council to look over it, to debate it, to perfect it, really. And I think that's what the work that they do in this field every day. They are the experts. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't have something like this for every division or issue that we work on. But they truly, I think, can make it a good bill. And that's why I wanted to drop the letters, indicate to each of them the process that I would like the bill to go through, and then present it to you all. The bill is HB 216. It simply provides for a rebuttable presumption that certain medical conditions suffered by firefighters are indeed occupational diseases. If you look on page 2 of the bill, it will show you a very limited scope of what would be considered an occupational disease, respiratory disease, and there are very robust conditions around respiratory disease and how that's defined. Cancer, AIDS, and hepatitis. And so I guess that's really, the rest from here would be the work of the Advisory Council, and I very much look forward to their help and assistance on this bill.
Thank you very much. And of course, this is the vetting process has started. Let me also clarify, just because that we're going to recommend these bills to the Advisory Council is also not a rubber stamp on the other side. We're going to we expect the Advisory Council, in their infinite wisdom, to research it and come up to find out whether there are recommendations that need to be moved forward, or they may come back and really feel like that the current system adequately handles that. I want to make sure that everybody understands this is a two-way street on this, that we work together as partners in this process. Any specific questions of Representative Gravely on that piece of legislation? And again, the purpose is not to take action on these today, is just to allow them to show some examples of the type of legislation that might be forwarded. Yes, who's 18?
That could be me.
Okay, that could be you. Go right ahead.
Well, the concussion didn't have anything to do with the question. It's okay. Representative Gravely, my only question that I had was the casual connections. I just wanted to make sure that it was, defined properly, that there were no casual connections compared to the occupational hazard. How
are you?
I mean, what I'm defining, I'm trying to say that, how some people say that it's just casual, that I just happen to have, the disease, because of some other things that happened in my life, but it was not my occupation that caused it. So I mean, that's, when you first brought it, I was very impressed with it, and I still am. But I just always want to make sure that that's clear. As a former pro football player, that 99.9% of us have concussion problems. So
absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's a very good question. I think that's going to be vetted out through the advisory process. For example, if you look on line 57, that if the disabled firefighter used any tobacco product within 5 years of the onset of a disability caused by respiratory disease, or if the condition existed at the time he or she first became employed or was first appointed, there shall be no such rebuttable presumption. So there's going to be some pretty strict regulations around, or at least how these things are filed, and the eligible personnel that can come forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Very good one.
All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, Representative Gravely, thank you very much for the bill. I know we have similar language on the Senate side as well. My question really is one that may seem obvious. Is there anything other than the uniqueness of sort of the public service aspect of firefighters that you think warrants sort of a special definition? I mean, and I'm the first to admit that it is a unique and special public service, but I think about the folks who work in industrial settings with all sorts of solvents and with all sorts of paints and all sorts of aerosolized products. In other words, that their work exposes them to what I think we would all recognize as being perhaps unique or even enhanced risks. Of course, they're not doing that with taxpayer dollar. I mean, like a firefighter is a public employee. But is it just that unique aspect, or do you think there's more to it that we should be thinking about?
I think it's the unique aspect of it, but I also think that there's more to it. Mr. Chairman, and I would actually, having gained a lot of wisdom from the last hearing, actually defer to the advisory process on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
we officially hope that the advisory council will take this under some type of review process as we move forward. Representative Nimmer has House Bill 536, and if I may take a liberty, I think this is one of those examples that I talked to earlier where he has a first-hand knowledge of a situation, and so with that, you are 23. Representative Nimmer, won't you go ahead and just say whatever you'd like to on House Bill 536.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 536 may be the shortest in its form of any bill dealing with workers' compensation that I've seen, but I'm sure it's complex in the conversation. And the intent of this bill is to shorten up the time frame that an employee can leave an employer and then come back and file a work comp claim. And then once that claim is noted, that it goes on through the process in an adequate amount of time to get everybody, the injured, the alleged injured, the care and treatment that he or she needs, and for the business owner to get them into the system of making sure that their insurance company knows what's going on with the employee. It's currently a 5-year limit, and that is, if you look in line 15 down to line 18, it just seeks to move that down to 2 years. This is strictly a place starter, if you will, a drafted bill to put it in the council's hands, the advisory council's hands, to go through their vetting process, to bring it back to the General Assembly to see what the members think.
All right, thank you. Any questions of the committee members? Representative, another concussion?
I woke up.
We'll go back to sleep.
Oh, like that now. Way to go, Representative. I guess I look at the dates and stuff. My only concern was, the claim, does it start 2 years or 5 years? I'm just trying to make sure that if there's claims already in the system, they go away, or
if they're already in the system and a case has been opened, that would stay in the system. The dates that you see here would obviously be adjusted if this bill was drafted for next year.
Okay.
So I mean, these dates would be relevant as if we were taking this matter up now. This will be subject to date changes for next year if we look at this going forward.
Okay. I just wanted to I didn't know if there was.
All those would change.
And I think the original intent of the legislation is that in certain situations, there's a concern that some people might use those dates to their advantage in some form versus the good of the overall. Is that a fair assessment? Don't want to put words in your mouth, but
no, I think you did a good job of it. Okay. That's a very fair assessment. I just think it's in the best interest and encouragement to both the employee and the employer that everybody knows what the rules are, and that there's not some 5-year window sitting out there to decide that I may have been hurt. I think if you've got a legitimate injury, within a 2-year frame is an adequate amount of time to recognize an injury and to go start seeking that treatment at that time and engage in whatever benefits may be eligible to you. That's the intent here. I know there's been some examples brought to me since filing this bill. Why don't you do something like Tennessee? That in Tennessee, it's been brought to my understanding that there's a 30-day window to notify of an injury. And if you don't have a written notification to an employer within 30 days of your injury, you can't file any kind of claim. So 30 days is a bit extreme. 5 years is too long. I think 2 years is a good starting point for us to look at. I think it's fair to the business community, and I think it's fair to the employers who would not want to be penalized, if you will, to benefits that could come to them through payroll and different fringe benefits in their employment opportunities by increased costs of insurance to an employer. for somebody lingering out there 5 years, filing claims, insurance models going up, pressure coming on the business, and then them not being able to offer more raises or other benefits to the existing employees in that field. So that's kind of that's the intent, is to tighten it up and clean up bad acting.
My explanation was shorter, wasn't it? So.
Yeah.
I
I was hoping it would, Mr. McLean.
All right. No other questions. Thank you very much, Representative Nimmer. We appreciate your diligence on that. Senator Albers, you have Senate Resolution 282. Now, this was a study committee recommendation, and you weren't here earlier in the hearing today to heard some of the background on the advisory council, but welcome and thank you for coming before us. And why don't you tell us real quickly about Senate Resolution 282? And again, you weren't here at the initial onset, but we went through some historical things, and we're not taking action on these today, but we appreciate you coming to share with the committee. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I apologize for my tardiness in this day before day 39. We've been pulled in a few directions. First off, I want to thank yourself and Chairman Bethel for helping to educate us through this process. It was one that was unknown to me, and look forward to following it along and doing what I can to help. I don't want to be repetitive to Representative Gravely. We are working together. We intentionally had both House and Senate companion bills. The difference was I did add peace officers to mine, as oftentimes a first responder, no matter whether they be wearing a uniform of a policeman or a fireman, they come up upon the same obstacles that would cause them potential long-term harm. And again, I don't want to go through the entire bill as it would be repetitive, but I would just leave a couple of parting thoughts to the committee and to those in the audience. Recently, firefighters and peace officers are named as some of the most dangerous jobs we have, but specifically some of the items that were outlined in that bill, hazardous materials and other carcinogens that we tend to face sometimes, whether it be in a fire or an overturned truck or a chemical, don't always have immediate impacts on the human body. Sometimes they fester over a long term. In fact, I know many of us today have congratulated our Vietnam veterans on the day that we recognize them very specifically, and many of them were exposed to Agent Orange. Only now, some of them being in their 60s and 70s, have the onset of cancer that has been directly brought back to things they sustained back in the 1960s. So I think this will impact a very, very small amount of people who service in public safety, but to them, it will mean everything in the world. So I appreciate your time and consideration. I know there is a process. I look forward to following that process.
Thank you very much. I'll add, not related to this bill, my father, who's 90 years old, he and my mom have been married 68 years. He used to be a fireman in Houston, and at 90 years old, when he was a young man, he talked about in Houston, Texas, that they lost more firemen in automobile in driving to the fires they did in the fires back in those days when they first came out with those trucks and everything. It's a far different business today, and I would also agree with you that very rarely do I see any kind of sirens that there's not both fire personnel as well as police or sheriffs at the same scene. So they do represent a lot of the same areas. So any questions of, yes, go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I want to, I probably should have followed up with Representative Gravely, but I want to point it out, and especially in light of the fact that there are members of the council here who are going to be looking at this. I do think one of the differences for all public safety officials, whether it be firefighters or police officers, is the existence of what's called the firefighter rule in Georgia, which is a limitation on tort claims for those who are exposed in the course of responding to emergencies. Whereas in other hazardous work environments, you've got a claim, even probably piercing the workers' comp claim potentially, depending on what it is you're exposed to. But a firefighter And just as a reminder, a firefighter who goes to the scene of a fire and is exposed to hazard cannot then turn around and make a claim for injury. They can in workers' comp. They can to their employer, but they can't. And so as this issue and these issues are worked together, I hope that the council will consider that dynamic. That these are people who have a unique limitation on their ability to be compensated for harm in the course and scope of their employment. And so I do think that there are reasons to look at that in a different light.
No, excellent point. I just learned something. I was not aware that was the unique difference.
There's a great public policy argument. You don't want people not to call the fire department out of fear that they're going to have to pay for an injury. So the law protects you from liability when you summon first responders, but obviously that's a limitation to first responders.
Right.
And if I could follow up on that, Chairman Bethel, I appreciate you pointing that out. That is something I think in the future we may need to look at. And other states such as Alabama have used that very logic that you just pointed out for why they made changes in their law. So perhaps it's something that the advisory and other committees could take a look at. And the last thing I would like to say, Mr. Chairman, is 9/11 changed a lot of things in our country, but very specifically for the police officers and firefighters who responded to that. Most of us are aware, but if you are not, the effects for those folks that are there, the rate of folks that have had injuries mostly related to cancer or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease are off the charts. And while we like to think that couldn't happen here in Georgia, it could happen on perhaps a smaller scale. And I think this would be just one more reason why we should take a good hard look at this. That being said, we'll never excuse someone for their own life habits, right? We all make those decisions, and if I were to do things that I know would harm my body outside of my work, then that certainly would be no place for workman's compensation. But I think there's a great slice in the middle.
Well said. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you being here. Our final presentation is from Representative Lumsden, House Bill 402. And if I may take a point of personal privilege here, this was one of those that Representative Lumsden and I were having dinner one night at the biennial, and we started talking about what he's working on, and found out he's working on workers' comp legislation. I've been working on it for a year, and it created really my understanding of how we don't always know all the moving parts down here. So I hope that's okay with you to share that story. But you are one of the main reasons that I think we need to educate more people on this. So thank you very much, and I'll give you the opportunity to talk about House Bill 402.
I'm the poster child.
You're the poster child.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, appreciate you having this hearing today so that we can present some information about House Bill 402. I would also like to thank members of the Advisory Council, particularly Mr. Bowen and Mr. Clark. Since learning of your existence, we've had ongoing conversations, and we have tried to work with the Council, and we'll continue to do that as we go forward with this bill in the coming year. But I want to talk to you a bit about House Bill 402. This is a bill that deals with work-based learning and business partner involvement in our K-12 work-based learning program. We have had youth apprenticeship programs in our public schools since the mid-'80s. We passed a youth apprenticeship bill back in the 1980s that governed the operation of these apprenticeship programs in our high schools. Last year, you may recall House Bill 766, which is a bill that we updated the 1980s law and brought our program and state law current with what is happening in the area of work-based learning around the nation. Now, that was done through an ad hoc committee that was made up of members of the Department of Education, State Insurance Commissioner's Office, the State Department of Labor, State School Board, and the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And several things came out of that of those discussions in that ad hoc committee. But one thing that was pointed out and that is central to the success of the program is having businesses that will partner with our local schools and provide opportunities for our students to have experience in the real world of work. Now, the problem the program encounters as an outgrowth of those discussions is that many businesses are reluctant to let 16 and 17-year-olds particularly onto the work site because of liabilities and workers' comp concerns. So Workforce development, of course, is one of those things that we're very focused on and have tried very hard to figure out ways that we can get this coming generation engaged and involved in the workplace, moving away from entitlement mentality and trying to get them engaged and involved in the workplace. So in trying to do some things that might encourage the potential business partners to actually participate in the program. One of the things that came out of that had to do with dealing with the concerns that they had about workers' comp. I have two folks that I would like to be recognized to speak, part of our committee, one that that can give us a little context on the education aspect of it, Mr. Dwayne Hobbs, and also Mike Royal, who is with the is also a certified workers' comp advisor, and I think he can give us a little context in short to the mechanics.
That's fine, but understand this room is going to be occupied by another committee meeting in about 4.5 minutes, so we'll have to make it very quick if they would be very brief in their comments.
Dwayne, too.
I will try to be brief. Program manager for the Department of Education, and I work with the work-based learning programs and youth apprenticeship programs in the state. And, you know, we have a great need for this. We have a tremendous program in the state. Our coordinator's doing a great job. I know a couple of my folks here from Wayne County very familiar with Judy Beaver, one of our best coordinators in the state. But this is the constant struggle and constant challenge they have, is trying to get employers to create that partnership, as Eddie cited. And this idea of some kind of a discount in workers' comp to those employers that participate, I think would be a great advantage to us. I just want to say that we have been involved. We're very much in support of this. We think it would help our program overall, and I won't get into any specifics for the sake of time, obviously.
Good afternoon. Mike Royal, Sutherland State Board of Education, represent Gwinnett County. Nice to see so many Gwinnettians here. If we have any local legislation, we could probably handle it, but I don't know, 2 minutes is long enough. But what you're going to see in this bill is, and what you've already seen in this session, you've been dealing with educational opportunities for children, whether it be the Move On When Ready bill, Opportunity School Districts, SB2. This what this bill is about. Stay at 10,000 feet. I can answer in detail any questions. I am a 20-year, it'll be 20 years this year, property and casualty producer. I own my own firm, certified insurance counselor, and certified work comp advisor. What this bill doesn't do is change the workers' compensation code statute or anything that would be available. What it does is codify and help clarify for employers so that we can get them on and help take advantage of the college and career pathways that I've worked with, and many of the opportunities that we've come together. We're having a tough time selling and marketing it and doing that, and this would help that. This would help create additional opportunities for children and employers to become involved, to have that workforce that we need in Georgia. I'll be glad to stay after and answer any questions.
The bill basically provides a discount to work-based learning partners and their workers' comp premium. It's modeled after the Drug-Free Workplace Act, and it's an incentive to get them to participate more fully in our work-based learning.
That's great. The Drug-Free Workplace program is a great program, so I'm glad to hear that. So, any questions of committee members? If not, I want to again say thank you for the committee members of both the House and the Senate for your time and attention down here as we prepare for busy Day 39 tomorrow. Thank you for all the testimony and the participants. Chairman Bethel, would you like to close us out then?
I'll do that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. I do want to recognize, as we went around the room earlier, that Senator Harbison from Columbus made it in, and we didn't get a chance to recognize him. Thank him for being with us today. Thank everyone for being here, and good luck on everything you're trying to get out by Thursday.
Oh, one final comment, and we've got a great group of legislative counsel and aides and everything. I will tell you that I love working with them, and one of the things I've found is Sean Marie is an example on our side, or for the committee that I chair, understands workers' compensation, understands it very well, and I would encourage anybody in the future, if they want to look at something that it's so specialized that even from a legal perspective, it really helps dealing with lawyers that understand it, and would encourage you to get with her too. So thank you very much. God bless y'all. Y'all have a great day. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.